Jebby, the grizzly bear, and Lurk, the polar bear, hailed from distinct corners of the world. Despite their divergent origins, both shared equally tragic pasts. Their paths seemed fated for isolation until the Detroit Zoo intervened, bringing them together within a shared enclosure. This decision carried immense uncertainty, for nobody could predict whether the bears would forge a bond of friendship or succumb to animosity. We can only imagine how tense the zookeepers must have been as Jebby and Lurk were brought together. Just because they're bears, after all, doesn't mean they were automatically going to hit it off. But due to the troubling past that the animals both shared, the hope for a positive outcome would have been palpable. Let's start with Jebby's story. In June 2021, residents of Tok, Alaska, caught sight of a young grizzly bear roaming around outside a suburban area. His mom couldn't have been far behind, right? Well, that wasn't the case here. The little cub had absolutely no company while roaming the streets. Some locals contacted the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, which is otherwise known as ADF-NG. They couldn't just let an orphan bear make himself at home on their street, so the department went to go and pick him up. Before the animal left, though, he was given his name. There was real concern about Jebby's well-being at this stage. You see, following their birth, bears usually stay under the watchful eye of their moms for around 3 years before going it alone. The Alaskan cub was a lot younger than that, so the ADF-NG feared he'd die out in the wild. Keeping that in mind, the ADF-NG made a big decision. To give Jebby his best chance of survival, the orphan bear was first transported to Anchorage's Alaska Zoo. While there, he was given a full medical checkup by the staff, who also watched over him until the next significant move. Jebby eventually said goodbye to Alaska as he then made his way over to Detroit Zoo. What a whirlwind spell for the little guy. As for his health, the grizzly tipped the scales at roughly 76 pounds when he got to the facility, ahead of spending some time in quarantine. During that stint, Jebby received another medical checkup by vets from the Detroit Zoological Society too. We wonder what he made of all the care and attention. Anyway, once that was done, the cub was released into the Arctic Ring of Life exhibit. But as we know, he wasn't there alone. That brings us to Lurk. The young polar bear was already a resident of the Arctic Ring of Life by the time Jebby arrived. And much like the grizzly, she was trying to move on from a pretty sad spell as well. We hope you've got a box of tissues handy, folks, because you'll probably need them. Lurk was welcomed into the world back in November 2020 at Detroit Zoo. Nope, she wasn't born in the wild like Jebby. Her mom Suka also gave birth to a second female cub called Astra that day. It proved to be a hugely significant moment for the attraction in Michigan. Why is that? Well, as a press release from the facility noted, the cubs are the first polar bears to be born and successfully raised at the Detroit Zoo since 2004. Wow, that's some gap. It wasn't for a lack of trying, though. Suka had actually delivered babies in both 2018 and 2019, but they all died shortly after. The aforementioned press release, which dropped in January 2021, raised another interesting point. It said, "The births are part of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, Polar Bear Species Survival Plan, a cooperative population management and conservation program. Currently, there are 56 polar bears in 25 AZA-accredited zoos and aquariums. So it's fair to say that Lurk and Astra's arrival was a pretty big deal. Mind you, just a couple of days on from their births, concern swept through the zoo. It looked like the happy moment was on the verge of becoming a tragedy, as one of Suka's daughters suffered a dramatic decline in health. Lurk had become very still in her family's temporary shelter, showcasing signs of depleted strength. The workers at the zoo were able to pick up on that thanks to cameras discreetly placed around the space. At that stage, they knew something had to be done, and fast. Hesitation wasn't an option. Suka was drawn away from the shelter, which bought the workers enough time to grab Lurk. That must have been tense. Once they had the sickly cub, she was then transported to Detroit Zoo's Ruth Roby Glancy Animal Health Complex. She was given a thorough checkup before receiving around-the-clock care. Lurk was especially tiny during that period, tipping the scales at just over a pound. She spent the next few weeks in incubation, away from her mom and sister. It was a different type of isolation to what Jebby felt in Alaska. Still, it needed to be done, and her subsequent progress proved that. By January 2021, Lurk reached a little over 11 pounds in weight. Her time in the incubator had finally come to an end, as she then moved into a playpen of sorts. The polar bear still had some work to do before she could return to the Arctic ring of life. As Lurk continued her recovery, though, her sister was being lavished with attention by their mother inside the zoo. Suka rarely let Astra out of her sight, keeping her close throughout the day. You can't help but feel for poor Lurk, as she was missing out on some important bonding. The zoo recognized the situation as well. In the press release, it said, "The rare occurrence of twin polar bears being raised separately, one by the mother and one by humans, means that much will be learned through this experience. Both cubs are monitored closely, and their developmental milestones are tracked." Anyway, Lurk was released back into the exhibit when staff gave her a clean bill of health. We can only imagine her relief, but there was just one problem. Due to her time away, there were some major doubts that the polar bear could reconnect with her family. It was heartbreaking stuff. So, both Lurk and Jebby were familiar with feelings of loneliness by the time they crossed paths at the zoo. Would that be enough for them to bond, though? After all, the bears practically grew up in different worlds. Could that contrast even lead to clashes? Well, it's about time we found out. Let's revisit the day when Jebby was introduced to the exhibit, which took place in July 2021. The zookeepers initially kept him separated from Lurk, intending to gradually introduce them to increase the chances of forming a friendship. It was a delicate situation, as the bears had been accustomed to solitude. The staff proceeded with their plan and slowly brought Jebby and Lurk together over the summer. Fortunately, they started to become familiar with each other, avoiding any aggressive behavior. In September 2021, after 2 months of cohabitation, Jebby and Lurk had become the closest of friends, much to everyone's relief. They were often seen playing, wrestling, swimming, and sharing toys in the Arctic ring of life. The Detroit Zoological Society, who proposed the idea of introducing another bear to Lurk, must have felt a sense of relief as their bond deepened. The Chief Life Sciences Officer provided further details in a September 2021 press release from the Detroit Zoo. Scott Carter expressed the difficulty in finding another polar bear cub to join Lurk, leading them to reach out to state agencies for an orphaned grizzly bear cub. The zoo was thrilled to provide Jebby with sanctuary and offer a much-needed companion for Lurk. Carter emphasized the importance of their social development for both bears. The Detroit Zoo shared a heartwarming video on social media, showcasing Jebby and Lurk's bond as they played in the Michigan sunshine, generating a significant positive response with thousands of views, likes, and comments. From September 23, 2021, visitors have been able to see the duo at the exhibit, as the zoo plans to keep them together as they grow older. The possibility of Lurk reuniting with her mother and sister as she grows older is a poignant thought. However, the Detroit Zoo has clarified that such a reunion is unlikely. In a press release, Carter, a representative of the zoo, explained that Suka, Lurk's mother, no longer recognizes her as her cub, making it unsafe to bring them together. The zoo further elaborated on this situation in a comment on Facebook, stating that even from a distance, it was evident that Suka did not acknowledge Lurk. Despite this disappointment, Lurk has found companionship with her new brother and will continue to captivate visitors in their shared habitat within the Arctic ring of life.